The False Angel, the Blood Angel Civil War, a tale of two brothers. In the annals of the chapters of Space Marines, there are moments of sacrifice, deeds so brave that they are recorded for posterity, to inspire, to encourage, to remind the reader that within even the most seemingly unlikely or unlucky, there can reside the seeds of greatness. Yet amongst those glittering pages, those almost innumerable legends of heroics, there are a smattering of other entries. Moments of calamity, times of direst loss, yet even fewer still are the moments of dishonor, of purity of purpose discarded, of treachery and even kinslaying, where Astartes fought Astartes. All will think immediately of the heresy unleashed by Horus, yet these are the dark days of the legions, not the chapters. For even after that, even after the horror of the first heresy, still there are times when this has occurred, where the chapter has been tested and sorely failed, shattered so badly that bolt of fire and blade were exchanged in the doleful din of self-destruction, where brother slew brother. Few are the chapters who have survived such a sundering, fewer still are those who have learned from one. And one might think that this bane, this curse, could never fall on the purest of the pure, the first founding chapters, those who continued the line of the Legion. Yet, even amongst these, the paragons of their kind, the twisted head of betrayal has been raised. And so, today, I shall reveal to you a terrible and tragic moment, a time when the soul of the progeny of the Emperor's most holy son near fell to the wiles of the Lord of Lies. A tale of those who should have been above corruption. An Ordo Inquisitor, an arrogant priest, and two brothers, not just of the blood, but of the same human mother and father. Today, I shall tell you of the False Angel and the Blood Angel Civil War. Belief. Story continued from Blood Angel's playlist. Captain Rubrio Messaro walked with a heavy heart. He was not alone, of course. Constantly, the golden armored warriors of his attached guard were ever present. At least two marched with him, never more than a few paces away, even here, even at the midst of his own battle barge. And Rubrio could not help but feel like a fraud. For they were the sanguinary guard, the very best of his chapter, heroes of legend, even amongst the Astartes. Most would find it a boon, a blessing, a verification of their own ability, that men such as these would be willing to treat his life as more important than their own. Yet, to Captain Masaro, he just felt the weight of his calling, for he was so content before to be a brother of the line. He had never, ever wanted to be promoted. He had never wished to be moved from the place where he felt his abilities ran the deepest. In the thick of it, amongst the bolters and blasts, transported by the Land Raider, he had come to love like a companion. He had never wanted this. Yet, when the blood ran so thin, when there were so few Blood Angels left, how could he refuse the call? How could he refuse promotion from the regent of an entire half of the Imperium? For it had been Chapter Master Dante himself who had asked. He could not refuse. And he had lost everything in that one moment. At least, that is what he had thought for decades now. It had cost him his closest companion. He still blamed himself for her death. Perhaps if another had led the forces, perhaps if another had been elevated to captain, perhaps that warrior would have been able to turn the tide without this terrible sacrifice. Perhaps. A never-ending trail of cause and effect, all reaching back to his actions. He had lost the camaraderie of his battle brothers, for a captain must never show the depth of their misgivings, and he had lost said brothers in the last campaign. He was now all that remained of Squad Justice Era. Hundreds of years of experience, wiped out in the blink of an eye. His brothers, gone. Because of one stray bombardment shot from an enemy he should have spotted. A segment of a battlefield he believed he had overlooked. It was not true, of course. War is death and carnage. He knew this. Yet, he felt their loss so gravely. And now he understood. At least, he thought he did. He understood how the ancients he was about to meet must have felt. The trudge of time was cruelest to those who were left behind. Those who had somehow survived. Such as he, and of course, the four he was about to consult with. Captain Masaro had ordered their awakening when they made warp translation into the system. Previously a little noted backwater, containing unremarkable worlds in an altogether unremarkable region of the Imperium. Far from the front, it had been an idyll that was blessed in its distance from the constant wars, but strategic prognostication had sent alarms so loud, so forceful, that when the auspex of the battle barge cleared, they were surrounded by the pride of the Imperium. So many ships, so many chapters represented here, let alone the massive build-up of naval and militarum regiments. Some said that there were night houses and even the god engines of the Legio Titanicus en route. It would be a campaign like few others. No, it was not the size of an Indomitus crusade, but few things had ever been that large, not since the Great Crusade itself. And it was the thought of this that brought Rubrio back out of his reverie. For one he was about to meet had existed since that time. If the thought of the Sanctuary Guard was bad, then stepping into this room was even more so. If alone, Rubrio would have stalled at the portal to this room. He would have taken a moment to breathe and to center himself before pressing the door chime and walking in. Yet, he could not. The Sanctuary Guard looked on. He could display no sign of weakness. Not before them. Yet, surely they would see it immediately, thought Rubrio. Their ancient eyes would see through his rigid exterior. They would see the weakling within. The man who cried over a lump of metal. The man who had led his old squad brothers to ruin. The man who did not believe he should bear his armor, let alone the chevrons of command. And Rubrio would have mouthed his one refrain, his deepest, most secret thought. One that hounded him every second of every day since Baal. It should have been his genetic brother, Luca Masaro, who stood here. It should always have been Luca. Yet, he could not. Hence, his arm shot out, economical in its motions, and the door opened to one of the most sacred places on the entire battle barge, the stasis room, the Hall of Ancients, where the dreadnoughts now silently stood, waiting for him. Of course, one was still in deep slumber, Brother Calamax. He was now painted all in black with red saltires. He had fallen to the Black Rage, and would not be awoken until the Death Company were deployed. Thankfully, there were few such at present, but as the war raged on, Rubrio was almost certain more of his brothers would fall. Yet the other dreadnoughts were active, though not in motion. Brother Cassael, entombed within a Furioso, Brother Rickwell, a Primaris Marine, within a painful Redemptor, then Brother Argento, one of the rare librarians who had been entombed. But above them all, at the head of their collective, there he stood, the legendary Brother Borobiel the Unbowed. Among his kind, he was almost silent, but always led, for he was a thing from another time, a different age. One of the few Contemptor dreadnoughts left, and Rubio's heart sank and swelled at the same time. Brother Borobiel could not be roused from his slumber but once in a score of attempts. Sometimes not for centuries did he wake. An ancient of the early Imperium, a Contemptor dreadnought, one who had actually seen the angel with his own eyes, one who had witnessed the power and passion of the Emperor himself, the master of mankind, when he walked amongst his people still. And here, in this place, Rubrio wanted to both sing anthems to his sire, that such a warrior would be amongst his host. Yet also, Captain Masaro wanted to hide. For how could he hold the gaze of one who had fought shoulder to shoulder with their Primarch? It should have been Luca. Yet the captain slowly took off his helm and looked up at this paragon of war, one who had helped conquer the galaxy. And he spoke. "Most honored ancients, most loyal sons of Sanguinius, I am Captain Rubrio Messaro. I come before battle to gain your counsel. Wilt thou grant me thy wisdom?" The silence that followed was deafening, until cut by the whirring of gears by the Redemptor. Then each slowly dipped their body forward in a clear sign of assent, as they had no heads to nod or shake. Done in order of seniority, until, at the last, only Borobiel was left. All waited, for he did not bow. He moved forward, the one step that covered the distance between himself and the captain, and slowly raised his right arm, and even the Sangre guard fidgeted in blatant shock. The arm came down carefully, and was placed on the pauldron of the captain on his right shoulder.
"Masaro, Captain Rubrio, you possess a proud name. My last consul was named thus. Perhaps this is why I heard the song of waking this time. Son of Baal, I will guide thee. I will show thy warriors the way. Report, then ask your questions, and together we shall see this war won. Together we shall see this deed done."
Long hours passed, and Rubrio now marched from the room with new purpose. Yet there was also a deep and challenging confusion. For his most ancient brothers had mentioned something again and again. Trust not to the sororitas. Never deploy with Templars or fanatics on his flanks. Belief. They cautioned against those who held it, those who wielded it like a chainsword, held it as central to their core. Rubrio had always seen it as a strength, had always been envious of those who possessed it. Yet, if Borobiel still had a faith, then it would have contained a marked sneer. Belief is brittle, he had said time and again. His mantra had seemed to be, "No. No, you are right. No, you are just. No, you are fighting the right way at the right time. Do not believe, but know you are a son of the angel." Rubrio had been staunch. No faith, no belief. Belief could be shattered. Belief could be broken. Belief was the crutch of the weak, those who could be turned to evil. He recited it again and again. Belief could be twisted, belief could cloud the mind. Belief made an Astartes brittle. Belief was the enemy. Brother Cassiel and Requiel were mostly silent in the face of their seniors. Brother Rubrio had held court. Yet, it was Brother Argento who had shook Rubrio to his very core. He had spoken of a time when he had relied on belief. He recounted how he had been blinded by it. And not only he, but a full company of brothers had nearly fallen to evil. How their belief had been turned on them. He told Rubrio a tale he had never heard before, and how their faith, their belief, had near damned not only the Blood Angels chapter, but threatened every last Astartes of the blood. He told the captain of the fallen angel. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and faces of the Warhammer 40k setting, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. This video will have a simple but I hope compelling arrangement. There will be description, discourse, and analysis, interspersed with immersively quoted segments from the books covered. So, as we begin in earnest, we must first understand the elements that precede the story to encompass its impact. And so, let us discuss the weaponry of the most powerful, pure, and holy of all of the sons of the Emperor, the Primarch of the 9th Legion, Blood Angels, the Angel Sanguinius. The Angel was ever one of the most potent of all those genetic and spiritual titans, the Primarchs. Yet, in the darkest days of the Siege of Terror, when the forces of the traitors bayed at the very wall of the Imperial Palace, only then did his brothers and their champions understand the true depths of his courage, his conviction, and his raw power. As the enemy assaulted the walls again and again, it was often only the vision of the angel above the battlefield that held the defenders together. And when he struck down, he landed like a lightning bolt, a being of pure wrath. His panoply of war was no less impressive than their wielder. For Sanguinius used 4 weapons of such might that none could stand before them. His least impressive weapons were the pistol in furnace, which could penetrate any armor, the moon silver blade, some said gifted by Dawn. This was his supplementary or backup weapon. Yet the other 2 were by far the more potent. The blade in carmine, whose edge saw the banishment of the greater bloodthirster Cabander, and the weapon we are most interested in today, the storied Spear of Telesto. For this was no normal weapon, even for the legendary days of the Crusade and subsequent heresy. The spear had been forged by the hand of the Lord of Humanity, the Emperor of Mankind. A shaft of exquisite design topped with a teardrop spear point with a hollowed center. It had such power that it possessed an animus of its own. It could pierce any metal, defeat any guard, was so swift it beggared belief, and, well, let's hear from the text directly concerning its most impressive ability in war. To quote, "The Spear of Telesto worked, and Arkio felt as if he were merely a vessel for the weapon. Like the igniter for an explosive power so far beyond him to be unimaginable. And yet, every second the weapon sang into his grip, and the teardrop blade brought ruin to hundreds of traitor marines, he felt himself changing. Power the likes of which he had never dared imagine coursed through Arkio, and his mind struggled to grasp it. The closest thing he could approximate it with was his rebirth when he left the sarcophagus on Baal for the first time, but even that was a pale shadow compared to the majestic force running through him now. He was 100 feet tall. He could see the passage of bolts and laser blasts, as if they were suspended in the air. He was invincible. By the lords, he was godlike. Arkio counted the word-bearers in an eye blink. There were too many, the spear told him. Their numbers must be thinned, and not in the sluggish pace of gun and chainsword. The Blood Angel saw it clearly. Action and reaction surfaced in his mind, as if he had always known precisely how to wield this weapon. Arkio swung the spear around him, and drew in energies untouched since the heresy. He gathered them effortlessly at the tip of his teardrop blade. In the golden backwash of light, he felt the bones of his face altering, becoming the mask of someone else, someone unaccountably older and wiser. Now! Mellifluent flame spilled forth from the holy lance in a wide fan and washed over the battle like a flood. Every word-bearer it touched caught fire and burned alive, and ahead of the wave rode a psychic storm of absolute terror. Those Chaos Space Marines, not kindled into powder, ran screaming in fear. Iskevan himself pushed his own men into the fire's path and broke. All sign of his unstoppable resolve shattered before the might of the spear. The firestorm lapped over the corpses of the dead and engulfed the Blood Angels. Rafen saw it coming. His body froze at the sight of it. He was unable to even throw up his hands and cover his face. He saw himself dying, along with the rest of his brethren, as his siblings' uncontrolled release of the lance's power killed enemy and ally alike. But the gold flames crashed over them, leaving nothing but a surge of adrenaline as their Primarch's legacy brushed past. The uncanny sophistication of the Telesto weapon saw the markers of Sanguinius' own bloodline in all of the Blood Angels and turned its power from them. Silence fell across the Drukhari fortress as the last flickers of light died out around the spear. Slowly, Arkio removed his golden helmet to drink in the destruction he had wrought. Across the carnage, his gaze met Rafen's, and the smile on the younger man's face was a warped mirror of the Sanguine Angel himself. But instead of nobility and purity dancing there, Rafen saw an aspect as cruel as a razor's edge, and his heart froze in his chest. End quote. The spear was made specifically for the angel by his own father, the Emperor, and with the two combined, none but a warp-engorged and augmented Horus could stand. Alas, the angel was slain in that dread encounter. He gave his life for his father. Details I should cover in far more detail very soon. Since his fall, his sons, the Blood Angels, have held these weapons as sacred, yet the march of the millennia has not always been kind to the Sons of the Blood, for they lost the blading Carmine, only regaining it at great cost, and so too was true of the Spear of Telesto. Now one might say, how could this happen? The war to defend the Imperium with all its vicissitudes can take a hard toll on those who fight it, and when a battle is won, then the Marines must immediately go on to the next, then the next, and then the next. In these times, enemies may move or hide, be slain by others, or trade the rewards that they have reaped from the battlefield. And even the mighty sons of Sanguinius, the Blood Angels, are not without their losses. Thus it was that an orc hoarding took the spear into the dust of time. But it was discovered again, but not by one of the Blood. The location of the spear was discerned by an inquisitor known to the Blood Angels, Aramius Stel of the Ordo Hereticus. He led a campaign of the Blood Angels to regain the spear, and he was successful. Yet, This was not his true goal at all. For the Inquisitor, as is so often the case amongst those who can be questioned or commanded by none, he became that which he swore to defeat. He fell to the blandishments of chaos. And he conspired to bring the Blood Angels chapter and legion entire over to the worship of Tzeentch, the dark god of lies. So, we now know the importance and symbolism of the artifact in question and the twisted traitor who had found it. Now, let us discuss the other players of the piece. Sachiel, the arrogant, sanguinary priest. To quote: Sachiel pressed on through the corridors of the Bellas, his stride never slowing as chapter serfs scrambled amongst themselves to get out of his way. The news boiled inside him. The sanguinary high priest was wound so tight with the message he carried that he thought he would blurt it out at any second. Space Marines came to parade ground attention as he passed, mailed fists tapping their chest plates in salute, while servitors and serfs bowed low. There had been a time when Sachiel would have chastised himself for enjoying the veneration of the faithful. In the Credo Vitae, there were edicts and oaths the sanguinary priests were required to vow, dedicating themselves to the sacred blood of the chapter, forswearing any glory for themselves. But those old, weak words seemed so distant and removed now. Sachiel's heart swelled at the notion. Since Arkio's ascendance, a moment had not passed when the priest did not think himself blessed to bear witness to such a miracle, and more, to be called by the reborn angel to serve as his adjutant and loyal commander. A smile crept across Sachiel's face as he entered the cavernous cathedral, making his way through the cloisters towards the inner sanctums. Since his youth, he had never doubted that he was touched by greatness. Many of his contemporaries had called him arrogant for daring to voice such notions. Let them have their petty jealousies, he thought, because he had been proven right. Great Sanguinius, to whom Sachiel had dedicated his life, had rewarded the priest beyond his wildest dreams. To be present at an event of such magnitude showed the lie to all of those who had upbraided him. Sachiel was no mere priest now. He was the hand of the blessed, and it was glorious. His fingers felt to the velvet bag at his belt, and the replica of the Blood Angel's chalice he carried there. Not for the first time, Sachiel imagined the moment he would take the true Red Grail in his hands and accept the role of High Priest over the entire chapter. The thought of it made his blood rush. Power, naked and beautiful, was within his reach. End quote. Alas, the fall of the priest was almost signalled in its coming, is what many would believe. For Sachiel, the canker in his heart was the ultimate of the original sin: pride. How could this not be discerned earlier? It is more complicated than that. For Space Marines must be ardent in all things, must be proud, must be disciplined and utterly directed. A Marine that wavers in battle is lost. Those who waver off the battlefield will inexorably fall to ennui or evil. Thus a mighty opinion of oneself is almost obligatory, yet most remain humble in their bearing, if not in their heart, and Sachiel was away on the 10-year-long quest on the battle barge Bellas, attached to the sojourn led by the tainted Inquisitor. He rose through the ranks to be given his standing. Who could say if the subtle corruption of the Inquisitor had not egged him on in all of that time, prepared the ground, one might say? Of course, he should have been immune to such corruption, such blatant egotism. But who could gainsay him, when out there in the void of space on the holy hunt for the spear? Power corrupts, it seems, even the most pure. And this Sachiel did not like nor respect one of those also centered in the tale, the hero of the piece, one might say, the brother Rafen. So, let us discuss the two who lost the most in this tragedy. For one lost his brother, and the other lost his soul. Rafen and Arkio. Now the law has altered over time, for originally Rafen the Ready is what he had been called in his period of training. The older brother, he had been sworn by his father to look after his younger brother Arkio. Despite being 2 years his junior, the Blood Angels do not recruit annually. Thus the two were deemed worthy candidates for the same intake, and they trained in the same cohort of supplicants. Rafen was forthright and brave, as an angel should be, but he bumped heads with Sachiel often. Rafen was a true son of the angel, as it is in him that the salvation of the chapter came, as we shall see. Arkio, the younger, always lived under his brother's shadow. Despite being able and swift, he was always seen as the junior. Hence, he leapt at the chance to come out from under his brother's shadow when the call for veteran Marines was given to take up arms on this decade-long quest for the spear. Arkio could not be talked out of it by Rafen. Despite his lack of experience, the ardour of his demand to join was not rebuffed. Arkio went with the battle barge bearers. And it was indeed a 10-year quest. But one must remember that the longevity of the Marine is far in excess of normal humans. Where we burn out before the end of even one, the Astartes can live many centuries. Although long enough to mould and change a Marine, this length of posting would be tantamount to a normal tour of duty, or even less to a normal soldier. Yet, the law has altered somewhat. For now it is writ that Rafen was the arrogant one, who challenged one of the recruiting Marines and failed in his venture, and so he was left behind as a failure, and Arkio was elected in his place amongst the blood. But it transpired that the transport taking the supplicants, the Blood Angel hopefuls, was taken out of the skies by a storm, and it was Rafen who then came to the crash site and assisted those present. When they were taken to safety by Rafen, Arkio pointed out his valour and demanded that his big brother be admitted to the ranks of the Blood Angels also. Thus, the Marine did bend to this request, and agreed to his initiation, and Rafen was taken into the chapter at Arkio's behest. Sidebar. Alas, it seems my library needs to be updated, so I will hope that this is the only anomaly in lore from the original compendium, plus do forgive an old codger if this is not the case. But do know, I shall cover the later exploits of Rafen when I have the time to read his own collected works. But let us push on. Sidebar over. Thus the players arranged and the scene set. Now, let us get to the meat of the matter. How did the sons of Sanguinius fall so far so fast? Well, let me explain. For it came in a moment that was seen as revelation, a sign from the Emperor himself. They were led to believe that the son of Sanguinius had returned. And this was the deepest hope of any of his sons. The enemy knew exactly where to strike the noble Marines of the blood. Their longing for the return of their father. After its long quest, the battle barge bearers came out of warp near to a world called Cibil. Hearing a call for aid, they swept towards the world just in the nick of time. For elements of the 5th Company had been sent to the world of Cibil to cast back an assault from the vile word-bearers. Traitor Space Marine sons of the demon Primarch Lorgar, the first heretic. They targeted a world precious to the blood. The Imperium is so huge, so vast, that they have entire worlds set aside for the burial of the honoured dead, and Cibil was such a world. And there were the graves of many a Blood Angel who had died on a previous campaign. Yet, to the word-bearers, the war between Chaos and the Imperium is not truly about fleets, forces and formations, but the soul of humanity. Far more deep than just morale, yet this was a facet of their shadow war. So they struck the very graveyards of the Blood Angels on Cibil. An response was sent, but it was not enough. They had been transported by a ship that was targeted by the enemy and eradicated before their first landing. The Blood Angels were beset on all sides by a far more numerically powerful force of the hated scum. Their captain and officers mostly dead, their armour and transports annihilated. They hung on for dear life. And amongst their number was brother Rafen. The battle barge bearers tore towards the planet and took orbit, chasing off the chaos ships above the planet, then dropped down reinforcements as swiftly as possible. The word bearers were threshed from above, the reinforcements and the renewed vigor of the Blood Angels of the Fifth punishing them. The word bearers broke and melted away, yet in these events they were not beaten. For their lord was secretly working in tandem with this inquisitor Stel, and they played their part, even when they did not understand the cost it meant. For behind the both inquisitor and word bearers was the greater demon Malphalax, a servant of Tzeentch. Not knowing that they were destined for defeat, the chaos ships returned, and in great number, in turn chasing the Bellis from orbit and dropping down waves of their foul warriors, both marine and cultist scum. The tables were utterly turned. Outmaneuvered and outnumbered, the Blood Angels attempted to withdraw, yet the foul sorceries of chaos had left traps in mortal form, and chains of human psychers were activated so that they expired in a messy psionic explosion. The Blood Angels caught in the blast were thrown into the Red Thirst, and fell on one another. The Red Thirst, the fear of all Blood Angels, even more terrible than the Black Rage, some say, for the Red Thirst is a curse built into their very genetic building blocks by their sire's sire. Yes, the Emperor intended them to bear this weight, an all-consuming hunger for battle and, most especially, for blood. Where a Marine fell to this curse, they would drop their weapons and attempt to tear all around them, and to get to their blessed vitae, their very life's blood. A curse that the sons of Sanguinius must face every second of every day to master and control. And this was seen as the most disgusting attack upon them, to strip them of their humanity and leave them as ravening vampires. The Blood Angels were beaten back, and even more diminished, their greatest weakness revealed and used against them. Morale was shattered. Yet, in this dire moment, at night, before the next dawn, not unlike that of Henry V in the Shakespearean play, a moment occurred. One from the most unlikely of origins, and it came from the young Arkio. To quote, "By nightfall, the last of the Space Marines that had escaped the Psyblast had stumbled back to the rally point. Rafen's heart turned cold and heavy in his chest as the weak warmth of the day faded. As light drew out of the landscape around him, so hope seemed to follow it. In the dank shadows cast by the reservoir's dome, injured men and battle-weary survivors sat in somber silence. Rafen walked amongst them, sparing a nod or a gesture of solidarity to those he knew personally. Outwardly, his manner was neutral, but within it was burdened with grim malaise. There were hardly a handful of them now, not a single man above sergeant's rank or armoured with more than a bolter. He passed chorus, as a veteran spoke in low, angry tones to Sachiel. His first order had been to tally up the ammunition and weapons held by the survivors, and Rafen could tell just by his expression that the numbers were poor. Rafen sat by Tertio as he worked to patch his armour with glutinous sealant. Nearby, a watchful Arkio cleaned his bolter. Rafen's brother had returned from a patrol with Alactus to report the terrible sights of the traitor's victory revels only an hour earlier. The wind brought the sounds of distant shrieks for all of them to hear. Some of them belonged to voices that Rafen recognized. "Once again we wait for death," Tertio's voice was a hollow echo. "Not for the first time," Rafen agreed, forcing the doubts from his words. "But we will prevail. We are Blood Angels." Perhaps on another occasion the sentiment might have been enough. But here and now Tertio met Rafen's gaze, and he saw the spectre of dread there. "I pray that is enough, brother, or else we will join the men on whose graves we trampled today." "We will not die here," Rafen said without heat. Tertio saw the lie and looked away. "You know that we will," and it shames us all that these animals will dance upon the bones blessed by the throne." Arkio came to his feet in a rush, startling Rafen. "No," he said, exasperated. His voice carried iron within it. "What shames us is that any blood angel would countenance defeat at the hands of the corrupted." He advanced on Tertio and pressed a fist into the other Space Marine's chest. "The blood of Sanguinius courses through us all. It is the very stuff of defiance and honor. But you speak as if your heart pumps water in its place." The low murmur of speech in the camp was suddenly gone. Every man was listening to Arkio's words. They were caught up by the abrupt passion that surged from him. "I face my fate with clear eyes," Tertio managed. "That makes me no less a battle brother." Arkio's expression was a mix of concern and sadness. "My poor friend, you have lost your faith, and yet you do not see it. Here," he handed Tertio his knife. "If you are so sure of death, take this now and slit your throat." "Arkio," Rafen began, but his sibling held him at bay with a hand. Something in the younger Space Marine's manner made him stop and fall silent. "Take it," he repeated. "You mock me," Tertio snapped, his color rising. Without warning, the Space Marine's dispirited mane broke, and in its place was a hot rage. "I will take 1,000 word-bearers with me before I go to the Emperor's side. I will not end my own life like some mewling, broken imbecile." The words flowed out of him in an angry rush. "There!" Arkio's face split into a savage grin. Inexplicably, Tertio did the same, baring his teeth. "You see, my brother, there is the fire of our Primarch. There is the fire of our Lord Primogenitor. Look within. See it. It still burns in your heart. I merely had to remind you of it." The younger Space Marine turned to face the rest of them, the knife glistening in his hand. "Look at us, brothers. Have we escaped the enemy only to let them win without a shot? Did our comrades die today just so we might wallow in despair?" "No!" a dozen men shouted out in answer, and Rafen was one of them, speaking without thinking. Something bright and powerful flashed in his brother's eyes, and he was roused by it. Arkio's every word was crystal clear, each sentence resonating with righteous energy. "The traitors think we are broken, beaten, defeated," he growled. "By Lamates, I say this is not so. I say we will yet bleed them white and send them running." Rafen's gaze locked with his younger brothers for a second. Arkio looked about him, taking in the faces of all the assembled blood angels. In the dimness, the Space Marine's sharp-angled face and his cut of golden hair made him seem like one of the renditions of the honored warriors of antiquity in portraits of the fortress monastery. In a moment of strange disconnection, Rafen saw Arkio as if he were a blood angel from the time of the heresy, an ancient face of all the chapter's most glorious past. Then the image passed, and Arkio was speaking again. "The traitors do not have the honor to meet us in open battle. They nip and strike at our numbers, wear us down. The word-bearers do not just wish us dead. They desire the destruction of our souls as much as our flesh. But to the last man, we can defy them." A chorus of assent greeted his words, but then one voice sounded above them all. "Your ardor does you credit, lad," said Chorus carefully. "But rhetoric is never a substitute for gun and blade." Sachiel's face set in pious indignation, but before he could censure Chorus for his interruption, Arkio nodded respectfully to the veteran. "The honored brother sergeant is right, of course, but I have more than just words to offer." "Explain yourself," Rafen demanded. He fixed his eyes on his sibling, part of him marveling at a facet of his brother he had never seen before. The young Space Marine stopped and pulled at something concealed in the long grass. With a grinding of hinges, a hidden maintenance hatch came open in his hands. "If it pleases my brother to hear it, I dare to have a strategy, a way we can take the fight to the foe, even when numbers are small as this, and still cut their hearts from them." End quote. And it did not end there. For there was more to come from young Arkio that night. He did not just come up with a plan for a counterattack. He performed what many considered a miracle. To quote, "The creature sensed the white and red shape in its peripheral vision and spun in a tight circle. As it did so, it whipped out its barbed tail to knock down a dozen more blood angels with callous relish. The shock of the strike pushed Chorus reeling against a tilted headstone, so that his fire was directed away from the creature's head. Rafen saw the beast move, coming a split second before Arkio, and he dropped, snapping out a kick at his brother's ankle. His sibling fell just as the spiny club of meat at the end of the creature's tail thrummed over their heads. "Watch it!" he added. Arkio's eyes were elsewhere. "Cibil, guard yourself!" The priest went off balance. The beast was far faster than he had thought. Its huge legs belied the thing's nimble movement. He slashed the chattering chainsword at one of the meaty limbs, but his cut was shallow and did nothing but anger the demon beast more. With its hindmost claws, it tore into the space marine who stood to Cibil's right, then threw his corpse into the priest. The impact tossed Cibil into a shallow crater, and the lanyard connecting his sword to his gauntlet snapped. The blade buried itself upright in the mud, teeth growling. Dark malice glittered in the creature's myriad eyes, and it flicked at the dirt. It resembled a house cat with a rodent, unwilling to bring the kill too quickly for all the sport it would lose. It ignored the bolt rounds that bit into it from the other space marines. It wanted to play. Rafen squinted into the target sight of his gun and saw Cibil's face behind his half-mask. With unfocused eyes, he was winding up his flank where the beast had casually cut him. Rafen's finger froze on the trigger. If he had to, he would grant the priest the Emperor's peace rather than let him be a meal for this monster. Then, like a raising rocket, Arkio burst from his cover and crossed the distance to the beast in a dozen loping steps. The demon gave him a desultory swipe, angry to be interrupted in his game. But the young blood angel dodged easily. He swooped to snare Cibil's fallen chainsword. He brought the buzzing blade around in a flickering arc and cut cleanly through a knee joint. A leg as thick as two men fell away in a gout of thick blood, and the creature let out a thunderous shriek. With one splayed claw, it pinned Cibil to the ground and snapped at Arkio with the others, probing and shifting in place. "He's going to kill it," Rafen heard Tertio's comment over his ear bead. The space marine was unable to keep the awe at Arkio's daring from his voice. Rafen fired into the beast, doing his best to cover his brother's actions. Arkio darted back and forth beneath the animal, slashing at soft parts that lay between iron-hard pads of chitin. Gushes of black fluid spurted from the wounds with ropes of slick, slime-covered intestines drooping from their open mouths. Cibil made some sort of strangled yelp, possibly a call for aid or a warning to Arkio, and his hand flapped feebly at the creature's claw. The sanguinary priest attempted to stab the beast with the Acus Placidus on his wrist guard, but the steel needle could not penetrate the hard, bony spines. A shiver ran through the demon, and for a second Rafen saw a shimmer of pain in its eyes. The agony of its wounds was at last making its way to the thing's tiny feral brain, enraging it even further. Before he could react, the monster coiled all its movement into one lightning-fast spin, lashing out at the irritant beneath it. Arkio did not cry out when one of the creature's blade quills rammed through his armor. The yellow cartilage emerged from his shoulder, with a mist of bright blood above it. Rafen felt his stomach fill with ice. Such a wound would surely be mortal, and his sibling's life was measured now only in seconds. Rafen's vision blurred crimson with a haze of hate, and he bounded from cover, heedlessly racing at the creature. From the edge of his rational mind, something hot and black began to uncoil. The dark shadow of the gene curse boiled up inside him, desperate for release. He bellowed an incoherent war cry, his bolter running red-hot as he emptied it into the beast. Rafen saw Arkio dead, cast aside in the mud, with whirring chainsword still ticking over in his mailed grip. As lucidity threatened to flee from him, Rafen had a mirror-bright flash of memory of his father on the day that he and Arkio had set off for Angel's Fall and the place of challenge. "Watch over the boy, Rafen. I ask nothing else of you." His father's face seemed to flow and merge like mercury, shifting into that of the Primarch and Arkio. Then the impossible became real before his eyes. Arkio rose in one swift motion from a puddle of rainwater and his own blood, apparently ignorant of the vital fluids that streaked his war gear or the black tear in his chest. With a single stab, he drove the sputtering, buzzing teeth of Sachiel's weapon into the throat of the demon predator and buried the weapon to its hilt. The gnashing blade severed the thing's vocal cords and cut off its cries in mid-scream. Arkio rolled the weapon back through the beast's gut, and it came apart with noise like ripping cloth. Organs and undigested pieces of men emptied onto the grass in wet heaps. The beast wheezed and died. End quote. Arkio's plan worked, and they took back the controls of the massive planetary-scale weaponry. They fired up and blew one of the Chaos warships to smithereens, and the tide turned above as below, and the Chaos rabble fled again. The angels were victorious. The other Dark Ones, both demon and word-bearer, were either slain or put to flight. Back on the Belus, the only ship in orbit now, there was a ceremony, one for victory. And in this meeting, the Inquisitor stated he had tortured one of the word-bearers taken in battle. He now knew where they hailed from, where they were hidden, and he declared that he and the Blood Angels, should smash this site of evil. Now some of the Blood were not comfortable with this, for Dante, the chapter master of the Blood Angels, had given them instructions to return to Baal, their home world. Yet, Stel proclaimed that they should strike out immediately, that if the Lord of the Angels knew what they did, that he would be in utter agreement of such swift and violent revenge. And to cover Stel's deeds, another miracle suddenly occurred. To quote, "Lord Inquisitor," Sachiel said quietly, his voice barely audible beyond the confines of the pulpit, "I would of course endorse you in this action, but the matter is unresolved. If we were to leave Cibil without sanction from Lord Dante..." Stel smiled thinly. "The commander will see the merit in my order, Sachiel. You know that to be true." Before the priest could answer, the Inquisitor raised his hands to call for silence. "Blood Angels, there is no doubt that your Primarch turns his beneficent gaze toward us. We are the soldiers of the Belus, and we bear the very weapon that Sanguinius was granted by the God Emperor himself." There was a movement behind the pulpit, and a gaggle of shrouded servitors from Stel's retinue came forward. They carried a lengthy case, cast from solid titanium, the surface intricately worked with symbols of the chapter, the Imperium, and Order Hereticus. Rafen felt a physical shock as he realized what the container was for. By the throne. The spear. "Our victory on Cibil was our sacred duty." The Inquisitor glanced down at the assembled Space Marines before him. "But there is one among you who excelled, who showed the true power of the birthright that sinks in your blood, even when defeat was upon us." Stel's eyes locked on Rafen's sibling. "Brother Arkio, come forward." Arkio did as he was ordered and stood up, climbing into the pulpit. Stel's servitors halted before the young Blood Angel and presented him with the metal case. "Open it," Stel ordered him. "In recognition of your daring, yours shall be the honor of presenting the Spear of Telesto." Arkio reached out and with trembling hands turned the latches that sealed the container closed. Behind him, Sachiel gripped his grail and uttered the words of the Liturgus Integratus. A joyful warmth infused the metal as Arkio laid his hands upon it. When he slid the clamshell container open, he saw inside an object as bright as a shard of the sun. The radiance from the weapon swept across the lengths of the grand chamber in a wave of pale golden light. Below the pulpit, Rafen stifled a gasp as the glow caressed the bare skin of his face. From the corner of his eye, he saw Tertio avert his gaze. He was overcome by emotion, but Rafen could not look away from it. There, Before him was the Spear of Telesto in all its malevolent glory. The Riga tapestries did not even come close to the majesty of the sacred lance. The blade itself, an elongated tear cut with a hollow in the center, represented the single drop of blood the Sanguinius shed when he swore fealty to the Emperor. Glittering with an inner light, it rested atop a sculpted haft that showed the Angel of Blood, clad in the monastic vestments of a sanguinary high priest. His perfect face was lost in a voluminous hood, and his mighty angel wings spread against the air, and below that, a single purity seal that bore the personal mark of the Emperor himself. It was the most incredible sight Rafen had ever seen, and his heart ached with it. Once more the words rang out across the hall, this time from Arkio's lips. "For the Emperor and Sanguinius!" Rafen's brother felt the nerves in his arm tingling as his blood surged with adrenaline. The gene template of the spear's ancient technology could sense his closeness, and the fragmentary elements of the Sanguinius' stock that sang through his veins. Unbidden, Arkio broke protocol and touched the angel's lance. "No!" Satchel blurted, starting forward to grab the Blood Angel's hand. He advanced barely a half-step before Stell snared him and held him back. The Inquisitor shook his head once, eyes cold with menace, and the priest was suddenly cowed. Arkio's limbs seemed to work mechanically, and he removed the weapon from the case, raising it in his left hand in a mirror image of the Riga artwork's last panel, Sanguinius victorious over the corpse of Morogar. The spear vibrated in his grip like a living thing, a streak of amber lightning frozen into physical form. Uncanny energy lit the teardrop blade from within, and, like a supernova, a pulse of white light flared. Rafen saw the color wash across his brother's body, and Arkio's flesh seemed to melt into the features of his liege lord. His crimson battle armor turned gold, and white wings flared from his shoulders. Then, just as quickly, the spear grew quiescent again, and the vision was gone. End quote. And from here, the course downwards was swift indeed. For the angels believed. They so wanted, so needed to believe that Arkio was in fact the angel reborn. All the while, the last senior sergeant of the element of the 5th, who had been Rafen's mentor, could not be convinced. He was the only one who doubted this young angel. Chorus was his name, and he also questioned the intentions of the Inquisitor. He alone voiced his concerns that the angels should obey their lord Dante and stay at Cibil or head directly back to Baal. He did not trust the Ordo member, did not think the angels should be under his directive any longer. He also thought the further quest foolhardy. When they had lost so many of the blood already, why not return to Baal for reinforcements? Yet Satchel pushed Arkio, and Chorus was overruled, and the Bellas set course for the enemy base on the planet Shenlong. Of course, this rebellion could not be borne by the false Stell, and he tainted a drink meant for Chorus with chaos. On the eve of battle, the sergeant fell to the black rage. His life was over. When the Bellas arrived at Shenlong, he was sent in with the death company. In this way, Stell silenced him. Yet this, among others, began a question in the mind of his protégé, Rafen. And soon, Rafen was caught in the tides of doubt. As things progressed, the feeling got stronger. The Blood Angel struck the word-bearers on Shenlong like a lance of judgment, and during the battle, Arkio, who bore the Spear of Telesto into combat, fought the traitor lord Iskavan the Hated, slaying him only after his backpack had burst off, and 2 pure white wings had erupted from his back. To all who viewed Arkio, his was not just a facial image of the angel. He was indisputably his reincarnation, the Deus Sanguinius. To all others this was obvious, but not to his true brother, not to Rafen. And he was right to think so. for things moved swiftly, unveiled themselves to his eyes. In an event where Arkio addressed the remaining people of Shenlong, trying to find out where the word-bearers may still be hidden, they rushed at him. Arkio's bodyguard, afeared for their reincarnated Primarch, they did the unthinkable. They opened fire on the crowd. They blew them to bits. And due to the guilt of the remaining people, they thought this was holy. Only one saw through this to the horror that it was. Only Rafen. To quote. Someone jostled Rafen, and his temper flared. "Get out of my way!" he snapped, turning a stern face on the man who had touched him. "Forgive me, Lord. I wanted to thank you." He was thick with dirt and a patina of brick dust, but through it, Rafen could still clearly make out the pattern of a tattered Planetary Defense Force uniform, an officer by the look of the sigils on his sleeve. "For what? I do not know you." "Oh no, it is not for myself, Lord, but for my sister. Not only did your chapter release us from the grip of chaos, but your kinsman granted her the murder gift." He bowed his head as he spoke. "Murder gift?" The strange word left a foul taste in Rafen's mouth. "You thank me because your sister was shot dead by the honor guard?" "No. No! Please!" The PDF soldier pressed closer to him. "You must understand. We were so close to cracking. If another day had passed without an answer to our prayers, many of us would have been sure that the Emperor had turned from Shenlong." His voice dropped to a confessional hiss. "Some of us. We were almost ready to submit to the word of Lorgar." Then he beamed at Rafen. "But you saved us from that. My sister gladly gave herself in payment." "Madness!" Rafen tore his arm away from the man and drew his combat knife in a bright arc of fractal-edged steel. "Tell me, if I told you to plunge this into your heart, would you do it?" The officer tore open his tunic without hesitation and exposed his pale chest. "My life has value only by your command, Lord." He seemed ecstatic at the possibility that Rafen might kill him, there and then. The Blood Angel's face twisted in disdain, and he backhanded the man with the pommel of his blade. "Begone, craven fool!" Rafen stalked down the corridor, furious. Was this the state of the people he took an oath to protect? Were the men and women of the Imperium so weak of mind that they would spring on any edict, no matter how loathsome, and claim it to be the divine word of the God Emperor? End quote. Arkio was proclaimed as Sanguinius Reborn, yet only his brother doubted. Rafen was troubled. He would stalk off to his own place to contemplate, a burned and destroyed, dilapidated place, and there, in prayer, he was touched by the divine. For he was given a vision, one that he believed came from the Emperor himself. His god had told him all was not well, and that his brother was a false messiah. And worse, that it would be Rafen's own hand that would end this infamy. Thus, while the Blood Angels on Shenlong basked in the beauty of the Primarch Reborn, they followed whatever he and his puppet master said. Arkio declared that he would take the very best of the normal men of Shenlong and forge them into a force that would support the Blood Angels. A total breach of the Codex Astartes and 10,000 years of tradition. Yet, he decried these practices as the past. He, the Angel Reborn, was the future. He stated that he was destined to unify and take the lordship of all Blood Angels, not only of the chapter, but of all the lineage across the Imperium. He would unleash a crusade of such force that they would sweep the evil from the galaxy. But Rafen did not believe in him, and he sent a secret message to Baal, the home world of the Blood Angels, and Dante responded. He sent a protege of Mephiston, Epistolary Vode, and Captain Gallo, who sped towards Shenlong. When they arrived, Vode, with his psychic powers, almost immediately detected the evil within Arkio and attempted to slay him. The enraged faithful of Arkio leapt to his defence and butchered both Fode, Captain Gallo, and all of their men. And Arkio, believing them traitors and unclean, ordered their vessel, the strike cruiser Amareo, blasted from the skies. So the Blood Angels lost a mighty ship of the line and all hands on board, a travesty beyond measure. Arkio, egged on by the ego-stroking of Sachiel, who gained authority through him, now declared that Dante was to be replaced, by force if need be, and thus, in their hubris, they sent their own message to Baal. To quote, "Calistarius," Dante said gently as he approached a clearing. Before him, a man in simple prayer robes knelt on one knee, tracing his fingers across the petals of a bed of white flowers. "My lord," said Mephiston, glancing up at him, "I have not heard that name spoken in many years." The chief librarian of the Blood Angels gazed at Dante with hooded eyes, the burning gaze that so transfixed the mind of his enemies at rest. "I have not been Brother Calistarius for an age." The commander studied the face of his friend and comrade. Dante had been there on planet Armageddon on a night that he had emerged from the rubble of Hades' hive, reborn as Mephiston, Lord of Death. Calistarius had been lost to the Red Thirst and buried alive, thought dead until a vision of their Primarch had guided him back to life. "Forgive me," said Dante. "For a moment my mind took me back to days past, to simpler times. In this place, it is easy to lose oneself in ancient history. In this place, it is easy to lose oneself in ancient history. Others may doubt the merit of this garden, but not I." Dante gave a slight nod. The Psyker had picked up on his thoughts. "You sent word you wished to speak with me." "Yes, Lord. I thought it best we talk alone, lest incautious ears or minds catch wind of what I must tell you." He gestured around. "I often come here to meditate, Commander. The tranquility of Baal's past soothes the path into the Empyrean." Dante's face became grave. He could tell from his old cohort's tone that Mephiston's news would not be good. "What have you to tell me?" "Vode's mind was silenced, Great One. Even as I rested here and projected my thoughts into the void, I felt the edge of a ripple from his psychic shriek." "Killed?" "Aye," Mephiston said grimly. "And Galio along with him. Every man we sent to Shenlong ended in a blink of fire." "You're certain of that?" Dante asked. "The ways of the warp are never fixed," replied Mephiston. "Like desert sand, the reel slips through my fingers. But on my sword I tell you, those men are dead." A cold, sickening familiarity touched Dante, one he had known a million times over since his first command as a Blood Angels warrior. He felt the death of each battle brother as keenly as he had the very first to die under his stewardship. "How?" "I can only guess," the Psyker added. "But if this Arkio is touched by the ways of chaos, there must be another explanation," snapped the commander. "An accident, perhaps. An attack by enemy forces." Dante's old comrade gave a slow shake of his head. "No, Lord," he said with grim finality. "You would suggest that our kind have drawn blood against us," Dante growled. "I pray you are mistaken." "As do I," Mephiston agreed. He was silent for a moment before he spoke again. "The Amareo's mission will not remain concealed from our brothers forever, Commander. Despite my best efforts, word of it spreads amongst the men. Soon, questions will be asked." Dante shook his head. "I will not reveal news of this transformation until we know the truth behind it. If talk of a second coming of the great angel grows, dissension in the ranks will follow, and a schism is something we cannot risk." He met Dante's gaze. "My doubts are gone, Lord. I believe this boy Arkio is a false messiah. Only out of fear would he have killed Gallo's party." But you said that you cannot be sure that this is what took place. Mephiston frowned. Dark threads gather out there. They knit together in a web of deceit, and we are caught in them. Shrouded forces, hatreds incarnate, are at work manipulating events. This Arkio is at the hub of them, Commander. We can only be sure by facing him in person, said Dante. Until then, he remains an unknown, a tarot card unturned. The psyker fell silent again, studying the delicate plants at his feet. You know this flower, Commander? Redkin, Dante replied. It has not existed on this planet in the wild since the 38th millennium. Mephiston ran a bare finger over the tough, rubbery petals of the white flower, the serrated edge of it drawing blood. Instantly, capillaries in the petiole began to absorb the fluid, turning the plant scarlet. The flower's roots mesh with those of the others that surround it, the librarian said. It shares the bounty it gathers. In a bloom of crimson, the coloration spread across each of the plants in the cluster. Mephiston's finger closed around the flower in his hand and crushed it, spilling a trickle of his own vitae on the rusty soil. Like us, one gives strength to all. But if that unity is broken... He paused, cocking his head. We have company. Dante turned at the sound of the airlock opening. A spindly messenger servitor ambled over on clanking mechanical feet. Once it had been a human being. Now it was a device in service to the Imperium, mind wiped of any personality, a featureless automaton made of flesh and implanted steel. Its blank face swung left and right, finally locating the Blood Angel's commander. With your permission, Lord Dante, a message from Shenlong arrives. Your attention only. Speak, he demanded. Via the astropathic duct Ulan aboard the battle barge Belus, Brother Captain Ideon commanding. Protocol Omnis Octo, it recited, relaying the trance speech from the monastery's own psychic communicators. The Sangre High Priest Brother Sachiel, chosen of the Blessed Arkio, requests an audience with the Lord Commander Dante on the shrine world of Sabian in 9 solar days on behalf of the Reborn Angel. The Reborn Angel. Mephiston repeated the title with a sneer on his lips. This whelp has no need for modesty, it seems. Dante was lost in thought for a moment. Sabian. I know it well. There was a Blood Angel's garrison there in the worst days of the Phaedra campaign. He frowned. Many of our kindred shed blood for every meter of that blighted planet. An abandoned monument world, said the psyker. An ideal location for an ambush. He got to his feet, fire dancing in his eyes. Lord, this is so transparent a trap. Of that we may be certain, Dante agreed. But this priest Sachiel, if he truly speaks for Arkio, knows only too well that I am forced to agree to the meeting. Mephiston's eyes narrowed. Commander, you cannot think to accept this so-called request. If Arkio wishes to meet, he should come here to Baal. He will not, Dante retorted, and I will not risk more lives to bring him under force of arms. No, we must seek the truth about Arkio and determine if he truly is Sanguinius reborn, or an impostor. To do that, I would need to turn my gaze upon him, Lord. Dante nodded. And so you will. You will attend me at Sabian, and I will have this Arkio answer for his deeds. Mephiston shook his head. I cannot allow that. The Blood Angel gave the librarian a sharp look. Do you defy me now as well? Forgive me, great Dante, but you are the sworn commander of this chapter. Your place is here, at the throne of Baal. I shall meet this Arkio alone. As your second, I cannot allow you to place yourself in such danger. Dante went red with annoyance. In 1100 years, I have led my men from the front. Now some child presumes to the godhead over my chapter, and you demand I stay behind? Mephiston's iron, hard gaze never wavered. If it pleases the Lord Commander, I am best suited for this endeavor. For all your greatness, You do not possess the warp sight as I do. My vision will see the heart of this pretender as plainly as day, and I will not flinch from his execution when the moment comes." He placed a hand on Dante's shoulder, a gesture of familiarity that no other Blood Angel alive would have ever dared to make. "My lord, when the men learn of this Arkio, there will be questions. They will look to you for guidance. And so I must be here to answer those questions." Dante frowned. After a long moment, he spoke again. "Very well. Your counsel has never failed me yet, Mephiston, and I will accept it now. On my orders, assemble a force of your most senior brothers and take command of the battle barge Europe. I grant you full power to speak on my behalf and that of the Blood Angels." The Lord of Death tapped his balled fist to his chest and bowed his head in salute. "For Sanguinius and the Emperor," he said. "For Sanguinius and the Emperor," repeated Dante. End quote. Rafen was detected as the source of the earlier treachery and was forced to run. Hiding amongst the wrecked city of Shenlong, he eluded them for a long time. When finally found by hunting cadre of Arkio's elite guard, he led them into a munitions hold, blowing it, them and everything for 6 blocks around, to smithereens. All thought Rafen slain, and Cibil and the Inquisitor secretly rejoiced. That the only traitor had been the actual brother of the Blessed One? It was not comfortable, not at all. But now, it was over. Yet, it was not long before the time came, and they went to meet Dante, or so they thought. Who they met there instead brought an entirely new complexion to the encounter, for, as we have heard, Dante did not attend. In his stead was the Lord of Death, Mephiston, chief librarian of the chapter, and arguably one of the strongest Astartes psychers who has ever lived. In all of this, Inquisitor Stell had used his cunning and warp trickery to hide the true nature of the change, for he had long ago placed a warp-tainted kernel into the young Arkio. This was a secret. This was the genesis and wellspring of the power, the might, and the mimicry of the Angel. The chaos infection that had changed Arkio slowly at start, hidden only by the wiles of Stell. Arkio did not know of any of this, believed in himself and his metamorphosis with all of his heart. Yet, could he, inadvertently, fool even the chief librarian? To quote, "The gaze was a lens that opened up the hidden world to Mephiston's perception. The power burning inside him shone through the gates of his vision like the beam of a devout searchlight, pinning the weak and the unhallowed as it fell upon them. His sight beyond sight stripped away the illusions of reality and bared souls so that the Lord of Death could examine their pale, naked truths. He saw Arkio as if he were an anatomical sketch drawn from some textbook of the Magus Biologus, layers of skin, bone, muscle, and nerve visible to him. The boy was glass, and Mephiston's gaze shone into him, illuminating every corner of his spirit as searing sunlight falling through a prism. There. It was concealed well. Buried beneath the levels of wards and mind baffles, the matter of it worked into the bone and meat of the Space Marine's body. But the taint could not hide from the unblinking eye of Mephiston's powers. The black ellipse floated among the perfection of Arkio's Astartes physiology, ruining the sacred organic design of the Blood Angel. The seed of chaos glinted and pulsed. In a faint way, Mephiston was slightly disappointed. Perhaps there was a part of him, however tiny, that had hoped Arkio's story might be true. But instead, Mephiston found himself confronted by a dupe. A mutant ignorant of his own poisoned nature. Other men might have felt pity then, but not he. The Lord of Death marveled at the perfection of the ingenuity of the taint. It was truly a work of psionic art. The construction of a maker both genius and madman. It bore the unmistakable fingertips of the changer of ways across every aspect of its form. He traced thin thought filaments from the infection, tracking the lines of their mutation, the recording of fleshy matter that had altered the boy from a marine to the simulacra he was now. Faint glints of contact danced in Arkio's aura, bending like flowers seeking the sun, all of them turning toward one man. Stel. Mephiston could smell his emotions like spilled blood, a cocktail of arrogance warring with controlled fear, desire, and avarice raging beneath the thin veneer of his icy civility. But the Inquisitor was not the puppet master here. Like a mirror within a mirror, Stel in turn was being directed by some other intelligence. He let his vision slip over the woman. She was like oil on water, repelling it instantly. Mephiston's sight could not hold purchase on her. "Tell me, Lord," said Arkio. "Now you have looked into my soul. What do you see?" The tension in the square came to a knife edge on his words. "Will you deny the work of the great angel upon me, or will you accept that I am the incarnation of the Spear of Sanguinius?" Mephiston drew back with a grim sneer on his lips. "If only your divinity matched the scope of your arrogance, lad. You might be what you appear." "How dare you!" blurted Sachiel, stepping forward. "He is a reborn angel, the light of—" "Silence, priest!" The psyker stilled him with a single glance, and Sachiel clasped at his throat, coughing. The gracious expression on Arkio's face faded into a blank mask of neutrality. "Mephiston, tread carefully. I offer you the chance to join my blood crusade. Do not be so quick to judge me. Come to my side, and I will welcome you as my battle brother." He arched his eyebrow, gauging the moment. "And if I do not?" "It will go poorly for you, Lord of Death. The sands of your life have already run thin on borrowed time. If you test them again, you will not be so blessed as you were on Armageddon." A soft laugh escaped the psyker's lips. He decided to allow the boy to talk. "Your presumption amuses me, Arkio. Tell me, this crusade of yours, what gives you the right to dictate such a thing? You speak as if it is your voice that leads our chapter." "And so it will be," Arkio replied. "Your master Dante has lingered too long in the command of the Blood Angels. He will step aside for me." The cold humour vanished from Mephiston's face in an instant. "He will do no such thing for a pretender whelp like you." The librarian's voice was iron-hard and full of threat. Arkio watched him carefully. "Perhaps not. If he cannot release his petty fear of me, then we will absolve him of his office, with all the due effort that may be required to do so." The golden-armoured figure summoned a trio of Sachiel's honour guard, and the men arrived with a titanium cylinder between them. Arkio opened the case and let the radiance of the Holy Lance light the darkening landscape. With a single swift motion, Arkio drew the ancient weapon and swept it up in a brilliant arc of light. "The Spear of Telesto!" The words fell from the lips of the tech marine in a humbled gasp. Arkio pointed the spear at Mephiston, sighting down the length of its haft at him. "I swear this by the blood of the Primarch in my veins. Know me, librarian. I am the Blood Angels incarnate. I am Sanguinius reborn." Golden light arced around the teardrop blade at the tip of the spear. "Give me your fealty or perish. The choice is yours." For one dizzying, horrible moment, Mephiston felt his world lurch around him as the lance hove into view. How can this be? He wields the sacred weapon. A storm of chattering doubts engulfed the Lord of Death. It was impossible to think that some debased impostor could ever be able to lay hands on the spear, and yet Arkio held the holy lance like he was born to it. Have I been mistaken? Could he really be the reborn angel? Who else could know the might of the Telesto artifact? Mephiston shook the churn of thought away with a shake of his head, tiny darts of blue fire crackling along his crystalline psi hood. "No," he growled. There was some magic at work here, a bewitchery so subtle and insidious that even a weapon forged by holy terror could be deceived by it. "I am not cozened, pretender. Your parlor tricks mean nothing against my faith." The Blood Angel's hand dropped to the hilt of his arcane force sword. the ancient mind blade, Vitaris. "No true son of Sanguinius will ever bend his knee to you, charlatan. You are false." A surge of anger thundered through the warriors of the Reborn, and cries of violence burst forth from Arkio's loyalists. Rafen let them jostle him forward. Arkio shook his head in annoyance. "Poor old fool. You were infected with Dante's fear, just as Vode and Gallio before you, just as every misguided man who sits under Baal's sun and believes himself a true blood angel. I am the way," he shouted, brandishing the spear. "I am the truth reborn. Your blindness sickens me, mind witch. I pity you." Mephiston's troops knotted together, breachers clattering on their bolters in a rush of noise. The librarian drew himself up to his full height, towering over Arkio's golden form and brilliant white wings. "Save it for yourself, fool. You and your Ordos accomplice. All of you are black with the stain of chaos. It reeks from you." He stabbed a copper-covered finger at the inquisitor, who met his accusation with a sneer. "This weakling is a lackey of the ruinous powers, and those who heed his words are equally disgraced with the stigma of heresy." The psyker's words drew a chorus of denials and vicious retorts. "Ram your steel. I name you traitor. You conspire with dark powers and revel in corruption. You are the architect of this apostasy." "No!" roared the inquisitor, the shout slamming into the distant ruins like a thunderclap. "The blessed is right. You decry all that you fear. Your words are lies, Mephiston, lies. Arkio is Sanguinius." "Then he shall prove it," the Lord of Death spat. "In the Book of Lords, the Pure One has said to be the match of any warrior that lived. If this is so, then perhaps your so-called blessed would be willing to face a true blood angel in single combat." Mephiston bared his fangs. "If he is the vessel for the will of the angelic sovereign, he will be victorious. If he is a mere pretender, he will die." He watched the consequence of his dare as it spread out amongst Arkio's loyalists, sensing the merge of anger and fear it engendered. He nodded to himself, exactly the reaction he had wanted. Playing the young fool into his hands, Mephiston had brought him to this moment, and now he would butcher the impostor like a prey beast. Such a brutal and very visible destruction of this golden figurehead was necessary. When Arkio died on the tip of Mephiston's foresword, his disciples and helots would break. Their confusion would make it easier for the Lord of Death to execute them. This insurrection had to be smashed in the most public and bloody way possible. Men on both sides began to draw back, granting room for the coming duel, and Sachiel had found his voice once more. "It's a trick!" he sputtered, the veins on his neck corded and tight with anger bordering on madness. "You cannot accept, Blessed. The Psyker is goading you." Arkio gave the priest a brief, beneficent smile. "Sachiel, my friend, your concern for my well-being is touching, but misplaced. I will not dismiss this challenge. If Mephiston wishes to see the might of the Red Angel enraged, then by the Grail, I shall show it to him." He stepped forward in a grim-faced swagger, the holy lance at rest beneath the curl of his wing. "I will face any man here," Arkio told the librarian, "and I will send him to the Emperor's grace knowing the truth of my divinity." He made a show of opening his arms wide to the assembled men, blood angels, loyalists, slave soldiers alike. "Who here would take up arms to fight me? Which of you will shed your blood to prove the righteousness of my decree?" The sword Vitaris whispered as it drew free of its scabbard. "Arkio," growled Mephiston. "It will be I will face him!" The cry cut through the air and set heads turning, hands frozen on weapons. "Who?" said the sergeant of Mephiston's flank. "It came from over there." The veteran indicated the mob of Arkio's men with the barrel of his bolter. The Psyker's perplexity increased as the crowd of ragged slave troopers parted to allow a single blood angel to come forward. His armor was discolored by bloodstains, and there was a gouge in his chestplate. As Mephiston watched the Space Marine step past Arkio's retinue and remove his helmet, for the first time, He saw an expression on the pretender's face that wasn't anger or arrogance, but pure, raw shock. Rafen. End quote. Rafen had returned, and from there, it was shock after shock for the followers of the Spear of Sanguinius, the false prophet of the blood. For Rafen requested, and then was granted, the chance to face his brother in battle. Despite the speed and power of Arkio, he had not the experience of his brother, and Rafen struck the false angel, drawing blood. And with that, everything changed, most especially for the priest, Cibil. To quote, "No." The word was small and plaintive, a childlike denial of something the eye saw but refused to believe. Cibil's hand came to his face, and it was only then that he realized the voice had been his. A great splash of crimson disfigured Arkio's immaculate golden armor, and the sight of this offense burned into the priest's vision like a brand. The sharp, tearing agony of the wound seemed to be instantly translated to every member of Arkio's retinue. The sheer shock of seeing their liege lord injured by a mere space marine hit them with a physical force. For a long second, all of them were struck dumb by the enormity of it, and Cibil could smell the blood. The scent of living vitae was as distinct as the bouquet of a fine wine or the aroma of a delicate flower. Cibil had known blood all through his service as an apothecary to the chapter. He had tasted 1,000 strains and touched 1,000 more in his duties. On battlefields, he had seen great lakes of it shed by enemy and ally alike. He had witnessed it gushing in red fountains from the arteries of men screaming for the Emperor's peace. Cibil knew the scent of his own blood, and that of Sanguinius himself, as it lay captured and preserved in the red grail on Baal. The stench of what leaked from Arkio struck his senses like a mailed fist. He sensed corruption, black and ruinous, some foul seed of pollution swarming and rising inside the blessed's blood. Cibil's stomachs turned to rebel and throw their contents on the ground. It was impossible. The priest scrambled inside himself for some explanation and found none. His senses had never betrayed him before, and they did not betray him now. Cibil turned away, blocking out the sight even though the smell was wrapped around him in invisible wreaths. His gaze fell on Stell. The inquisitor growled some order at his hooded side-witch. Stell caught his sight for a fractional instant, and Cibil saw him start. "You," Cibil managed, the word bubbling up from a deep hidden place. "You." Like breaking glass, the compulsion Stell had placed in Cibil's psyche aboard the Belus suddenly shattered. Perhaps it was the shock of Arkio's injury, perhaps some last fragment of Cibil's honorable self rising to the surface. But in that instant, the priest was freed of the psycho's hold on his will. Cibil's world, so perfect and so rationalized, so carefully assembled to serve his ego, came crashing down about him. Floodgates of denied, forgotten memories disintegrated, and the priest was knocked to his knees by the force of them, wailing. Every line he had crossed, every choice he had made in order to aggrandize himself. And Stell had been there to help him do it. Cibil's gorge rose as the stink of mutation filled every pore of his skin, contaminating him and choking the air. "Oh, Lord," he wept, bitter tears falling from his face. "What have I done?" He looked up at Stell and saw the inquisitor staring down at him, an expression of utter contempt on his cruel lips. "What have you done to me?" Stell knelt and whispered in his ear. "I gave you the tools to destroy yourself." End quote. Arkio fled, diving into the skies upon his wings, and his followers attacked the cluster of Mephiston's loyalist blood angels. Waves of the ragtag scum of the Blood Crusade hurled themselves at the Marines. Of course, the true sons of Sanguinius slaughtered them with efficiency and ease, but there were many. The Blood Angels of Arkio would become conflicted, but not yet. They too assailed the positions of the men under Mephiston. Blood Angel slew Blood Angel. For his part, Rafen demanded the right to follow Arkio and end the matter. With a jump pack now gained from a tech marine, Rafen took after Arkio. Pre-organized and aimed missile salvos named covered the area as more assailants entered the fray. Above the planet, a deadly duel of battle barges began as the Europae, Mephiston's flagship, and the Belus began their tussle. Alas, it was then that a chaos vessel interrupted and made the battle what many would think a three-way. But the true crime was getting worse. As the captain of the Belus, the supporter of Arkio, would not even fire on the Chaos ship, despite it being the larger. And infamy beyond infamy. They actually worked with the Chaos ship at first, concentrating their fire on the Europae. Events on the ground erupted into a new level of rage, when word-bearers assailed the forces of Mephiston as well, some of the blood held, shocked that they would be asked to fight alongside these scum, and the battle of the brothers began anew. The confrontation between Arkio and Rafen is epic indeed, as Arkio mutated as the moments passed. With each blow struck by his brother, he worsened. Arkio had now utterly fallen to chaos, and it showed on his face, his body, his wings. He claimed he had been elevated to godhood. He would take the stars or stuff them out if they resisted. He would be a new god, beholden to none, above all others, both mortal and immortal. And Rafen steeled his soul, as he struck again and again at his foul brother. Arkio should have been the better in all things, for he was faster, stronger, armed with the Spear of Telesto. Yet he was not touched by the true angel. That blessing was gifted to his brother, Rafen. The spear, now sensing the evil within Arkio as he degenerated, resisted his commands. It fired Rafen but once, yet he was of the blood, and it could not harm him thus. The spear would then refuse to do so again as the battle progressed, and later, as the corruption with Arkio was manifest, it twisted in his palms, fought against him, until it eventually turned to fire and heat and burned Arkio so badly his gauntlets melted. Arkio dropped it, as he had to, and Rafen came back on the attack. With jump pack boosts, he had met his winged brother in the air time but again. Now the end was here. The two, armor smashed, met again. With fists and teeth and claws, Arkio bear hugged his brother, breaking him and casting him down into a dark pit. Yet, though Rafen should have died, he was touched by the light of the true soul of Sanguinius, and he was energized. He came up again, bursting on wings of fire from the darkness of the pit he had been cast into, and the vampire of hate that was once his brother was blindsided, and Rafen punched his combat blade into the very center of Arkio. Dying, Arkio fell, landing on the upright standing Spear of Telesto. Justice had been done. But what came next was hard. For Rafen landed and saw his brother, not Arkio the Blessed, not the Deus Sanguinius, not the Vampire of Chaos. In his last, Arkio returned to sanity. To quote, Rafen's thruster pack ran dry when he was still 30 meters from the ground, and he tumbled and dropped as if he were made of lead. Slamming his balled fist into the release switch on his belt, he felt the dead weight of the pack detach, and freed of the burden, he turned into a spin, crashing through age-rotted beams to land with a bone-jarring crack of sound. A ring of water scattered away from him in a ripple. From his kneeling stance, Rafen rose, his eyes narrowed against the biting winds. He scanned the interior of the church, afraid of what he would see, and there he saw it. Pinned to the stone as a gigantic collector might exhibit some rare moth or butterfly, Arkio lay with the Spear of Telesto run through him. All about his sibling was a spreading aurora, the colour of autumn, a most unearthly golden light. Favouring his injured leg, Rafen jogged across the transept and came to Arkio's side. "Brother," Rafen gasped in amazement. Despite so brutal an injury, Arkio still clung to life with fierce tenacity. His sibling's hands were clasped to the haft of the spear, the burning glow crisping away the flesh. Arkio seemed not to notice the pain. Brother, Rafen repeated, searching his sibling's face for the shroud of contamination. Arkio seemed as ruined as the shattered landscape of the city shrine about them, hollow inside. The black trains of poison boils still seethed beneath his marbled skin, but his eyes belonged to the Arkio that Rafen remembered from their youth, the naive and bold soul that had given him strength and loyalty. There was pain there, of a kind Rafen had only seen in the eyes of sinners and turncoats fallen to the law of the Inquisition. Before he had never questioned it, but now he saw it for what it was. Regret. So powerful and so heartbreaking that the emotion could barely be contained by human will. "What have I done?" Arkio rasped, holding his brother's gaze. "I have broken every compact and promise. I have turned my back on what I am and embraced the void." He shuddered and wailed, "O Lord Emperor, I have betrayed all I hold dear." His hate rage ebbing, Rafen found only one answer in the echoing chasms of his heart. Yes. The humming of the spear gently rose and fell in the fading rhythm of Arkio's secondary heart. Each peak and trough grew longer as life ebbed from him into the stones and the rain. "I was weak," he managed. "I thought I could protect myself from this." He gestured feebly, and his wings jerked in response. "From falling from the path. My arrogance. I believed it. I am sorry, Arkio," Rafen said, silent tears falling from his eyes, drawing lines and dark smears of blood and soot on his cheeks. "I am sorry I was not there to stand with you, turn you from this corruption." "No," Arkio whispered. "You share no burden with me, kinsman. I will bear this stigma." He shivered, a drool of blood escaping from his lips. "My error. I was weak." "Arkio, no. You were human." He forced a wan smile. "Fear not, Rafen. This is our fate. Both of us saw it." Rafen gasped. "You knew this would be by my hand?" "Yes." "And so it was." His ruined fingers crossed Rafen's chestplate and touched his brother's cheek. "You weep for me. That is all I ask, kinsman. The Emperor will damn me for my folly, and I accept that without question. But you, I ask you to forgive me. I recant, Rafen. Please forgive me, my brother." "I forgive you, Arkio. On our father's grave, I swear it." Arkio gave a shallow final nod of thanks. "That is mercy enough." His eyes fluttered closed, and the spear fell silent. Rafen knelt there for an age, no sound in his ears but the rush and thunder of the rainstorm, no feeling inside him except the raw despair of loss. Finally, his heart brimming with its grievous remorse, Rafen came to his feet with his brother's body in his arms, the holy lance excised from the dead man, and there at Rafen's shoulder. The warm, mellifluent light of the spear illuminated the ruins about him, and he held Arkio high. He seemed to weigh so little now, as if the burden of his tainted change had run away with his shed blood. In the near distance, Rafen saw the firefly sparkles of bolter discharges, and on the wind came gunshots, screams, and the chants of the word-bearers. The Blood Angel's face set in grim determination, and he advanced towards the fighting. He left nothing behind him but his doubts. End quote. Rafen, showing the courage of his convictions, then did what many could not. Despite his brother dying in his arms, despite how Rafen must have wanted to hold him in his embrace and howl, No. He did what was necessary. Rafen took the broken and obviously corrupted body of his brother and displayed him on a precipice above the main battle, and there he called out and showed the faithful of Arkio what they had been following. He threw down the body of his brother to break further on the battlefield, and the effect was instant. The faithful Blood Angels had been duped, and they knew it. This was proof enough. It broke the shackles of psyche and psychology that had held them to Arkio. They turned on the Blood Crusade cultists and the Word-Bearers both. They rejoined the pure, and fell in line with the Marines under Mephiston. And then they slaughtered the Word-Bearers. The perverted Inquisitor Stel was himself betrayed by the demon Malphalax, swallowed into his own form, subsuming Stel's soul into the greater horror of the demon. Sachiel was dead. The battle barge Belus, the strike cruiser Amarello, and all of their crew were gone, and hundreds of Blood Angels would never battle evil again. Yet the civil war was over. The sons of Sanguinius were unified once again. The tales of Rafen, of course, continue, but that I will get to at a future date. And thus we see, in the grim darkness of the far future, that faith can be both armor and sword, but it can indeed make one vulnerable. For there are none who are more devoted to the cause of the Imperium, none who are more ardent in their defense of the realm, none who are more filled with zeal than the sons of Sanguinius. Yet it is based not on faith, not belief, not blind obedience. The Blood Angels have such conviction due to the battle they wage against their flaws. The control it takes to dominate and resist the urges to kill, to drink the heart's blood of all around them. It is not faith or belief in their God that drives them. It is the knowledge that they must resist evil in all of its forms, for they wrestle with it every hour of every day. They know what is there in the darkness of the pit, where others dare not even look, for they carry it within themselves. They know evil, thus they know how to defeat it. Courage, honor, duty, and most importantly, sacrifice their own. I have been Baldermort. Now, if you've enjoyed this entry, please do consider liking and subscribing, and look in the description to this video for more tales of the Blood Angels and a link to our other channel, Living Mythology. And you may just find some other links that might be of interest to you, so go have a look. I won't tell you what, go check. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.